Today on the property panel we have Robert Larocca from the REIV, Claire Noone, Director of Consumer+Affairs+Victoria, and Lachie Pitman from Aussie Home Loans.
Hi Karina.
We're talking about buyer beware and the pitfalls of buying. Claire, what's the difference between buying at auction and buying at private sale?
Well, let's talk about private sale first. When you buy at private sale, you sign a contract, but you do have some rights to actually withdraw from that contract. You've got 3 days to cool off and change your mind in that situation. When you buy at auction, however, you don't have any cooling off rights, and that's a major difference. So we always encourage you to make sure that you've done your homework properly before you enter into a contract, and particularly if you're buying at auction, that you really have read all of the contract documents before the auction, you've read the Section 32 statement, you've done your building inspection, and you actually know exactly what you're getting into when you sign on that dotted line on auction day.
But what happens before you actually sign the contract? If you're at an auction and you're the last bidder and you have second thoughts between then and going in and signing the contract?
As the last bidder, if it isn't knocked down to you, you are the person with whom the vendor is going to treat, that is going to discuss whether you enter into a contract, but you're not bound to actually sign that contract at that time. You may not, for example, be able to agree on the price.
It was interesting, a couple of years ago the state government made some changes to the auction laws to deal with that issue. It used to be the case that an auctioneer wasn't restrained from taking further bids after the hammer had gone down. It was a little fine point in the conduct of auctions in the state, and it led to every now and again a circumstance occurring where there would be a bid after the fact. And they closed that down, so the auctioneer's restrained. Once they knock it down, they can't take a further bid. However, of course, you know, it's not often talked about, but the vendor can change their mind after the fact. I mean, they've still got to sign the contract.
Yeah, and the buyer can change their mind too, can't they, Claire?
Yes, and they still have to sign the contract in the same way as the vendor. Yeah. So not until both have signed the contract is there an actual sale agreement.
Lachie, what's the main difference that you notice between buying at auction and buying at private sale?
Generally most people buy at auction are better prepared, they've done their homework and they know what they're going for. Sometimes people impulse buy, which has happened a few times, and people come to see us on a Monday, panicked, wonder what they've done. They bought a property, they don't know whether they get the finance, things like that. So that's sort of the main issue with people just doing their homework, generally buying an auction, buying private sale, because as Claire said a minute ago, there's a 3-day cooling off period if you buy a private sale, so they've got a few days' grace to change their mind if need be. And
what happens if someone can't get their finance organised in time for settlement?
Well, there's panic stations normally. There's a thing called a solicitor or a conveyancer to try and help them out. Happens quite regularly that people, they buy a house or they get what they call a pre-approval. They think they've got a loan, but it's only an approval in principle. They go and buy a property and it's not satisfactory to the bank, or for some particular reason they've given wrong information to the bank or someone or the lender, or someone hasn't asked the right questions. For example, have you had a default? Everything looks fine, and sometimes you can't assume someone who's in a high-paying job and got a responsible job, quite often they've got a default, so you can't just assume you've got to do their homework. So you're better off getting a proper formal approval before you go to buy a property, whether it's auction or private sale.
Certainly we would say if you're entering a private sale and you're entering into a contract and you haven't got your finance secured, you should make sure that you make the contract subject to finance, so that in the event that you're unable to get the finance, you're not bound to continue with that contract. You may, of course, lose your deposit in those circumstances.
Right. So can you make an auction contract subject to finance?
No, you're not able to do that. That's one of the other differences between a private sale contract and an auction contract.
Yeah. And what happens if conditions change between the time you apply for a loan and the time you actually come to settle it? And in some of those situations it can be 12 months later or 18 months later.
You're still bound by the contract of sale, and those are the conditions that you will need to comply with and to fulfil those obligations. Sometimes people do try to get out of their arrangements because things have occurred during that period. Again, that goes to whether there's a dispute or whether there are some issues. But if you want to pull out of the contract, get some advice, but also recognise that you may lose your deposit in those circumstances.
One issue that can come up is alignment of settlement dates often, because a lot of people, they're selling simply to buy and they're moving from one property to the other, and you can't always tell up front what the settlement date alignments will be. So it's always possible to ask the other parties involved in both transactions if they can vary the settlement dates to ones that align, because that can help you avoid extra financing costs for bridging finance.
And we would caution people about buying another place before they've sold their own, because that's often the circumstance where you don't have that alignment and you may not have your settlement funds organised, and you may find yourself paying a lot of bridging finance and getting yourself into a bit of a panic. So people do it, I know, but our advice would be to discourage it.
It's a good point. It's happening more and more regularly now. We've come across a couple of clients recently who've got expensive houses. They've gone and bought another one in anticipation of selling their expensive house. Now, unfortunately, the market's a bit soft. They can't sell these houses. There's only a couple of banks will do bridging finance, so putting stress on them financially, also on their marriage.
Yep. Robert, what are some of the pitfalls that you come across?
Most of it comes back to, from our experience, a lack of homework. If someone hasn't, as Claire suggested, done the research before the purchase, then they are not sure what's going to come up next. And like anything that's that important in your life, you want to put the time and effort into making sure you know what's going to come up and what your options are. So most of them come to that, just simply not being aware of the process and what can happen next.
And how can you inform yourself, though? How do you, do your homework?
Well, ask questions, of course. I mean, we've talked before about how to do research from the purchase price perspective, but the legal aspects of it and the process, Consumer Affairs Victoria are fantastic on that up front. They've got a very excellent guide for buyers and sellers that you can pick up from them, or in fact from the REIV, we will give it to people as well. Yep. And it provides really simple, sensible advice.
Yep. Claire, what sort of information does that include?
We've got a full range of information on our website, consumer.vic.gov.au, and encourage people to go there to find all of the information they need. There's a very handy checklist which you can ask yourself a few questions and tick down the list. Have I done my research? Do I know what sort of property I'm looking for? Have I organised my finances? A whole range of issues. Do I need to do a building inspection? Will I need to do a pest inspection on this property? A full checklist to help you to get started. And then our guide has all of the information you might need when thinking about this really important transaction that you're going to be entering into.
Thanks very much, everyone. That's all we've got time for this week.